salespeople, they have this like sort of like inner sort of like edge. You were talking about that dog in them, like, um, that sort of thing that drives professional athletes the same way to become Olympians.
Ingwan Che. So this is a very special interview for me. So everybody make sure you're paying attention, taking notes. This is going to be very helpful. So first, I just want to say, Ingwan, I appreciate you joining.
Yeah, thanks for making the time as well.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Yeah. So I first wanted to start off really get into a little background about yourself. So can you just tell a little bit about yourself, your background, and where you're from?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ingwan. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. Uh, I I've had a little bit of international experience. So I grew up in Houston. My parents and my family moved back to Korea in middle school, where I'm originally. My parents are both from, and then I came back to the United States for high school. I studied math and economics at MIT for college, and then my first job out of college, I spent 5 years working for a Wall Street bank called Morgan Stanley, where I was on the sales and trading teams. I remember my first job was, um, uh, you know, everyone starts from somewhere. And so my first job at Morgan Stanley was making a lot of calls to, hedge fund managers to solicit business and things like that. So, yeah, I remember my first 6 months on the job was a lot of cold calling and reaching out and kind of learning about sales that way. After about 5 years working at Morgan Stanley, I left to go work um, for some tech companies. So in 2019, I moved to a company called Verkada, which sells physical security products. So think cameras, access control, intrusion alarm systems to businesses. Um, and I worked in the sales operations, revenue operations, and demand generation teams there. Um, After about 2 years there, I left to be the head of growth at a cloud cybersecurity company called Wiz. And after about a year at Wiz, I left to start Glencoco.
Okay, perfect. And before we get more into Glen Coco, can you tell us a little bit more about that Morgan Stanley experience and your more technical roles, and then how you feel like that experience and those transferable skills led you to do what you do now?
Yeah, I would say I loved my time at Morgan Stanley. It's probably one of the most competitive companies to get a job at. The way they typically recruit is they won't hire anyone outside of like target schools, which are basically like the Ivy Leagues, MIT and Stanford, and then a couple other sort of like top, 50 universities. Even then, the recruiting process is incredibly competitive. So typically, the way you get a job, if you haven't previously had experience in the industry, is you do what are called summer internships. And summer internship recruiting is competitive even within target schools. Not everyone gets an internship, so it's competitive within the schools. Once you get the job, have you ever seen the movie Hunger Games?
Yeah, I'll let that move.
Yeah, so it's summer internships at Wall Street banks are a little bit like Hunger Games in the sense that they actually will hire like, you know, 50 to 60 interns, and they only really have spots for full-time offers for 30 or 40 sort of like actual candidates.
Mm,
What they'll do is they'll intentionally overhire summer interns, knowing that they kind of have to fight it out and compete against each other to win out and get a full-time offer. And you're going up against some of the top you know candidates from top schools, so it's a very sort of competitive job. uh, a lot of it, you have to do a lot of networking. You have to be the first one in the office and the last person out of the office. um, so I was fortunate enough to have a good summer internship and get a full-time offer, um, on a team that I liked at Morgan Stanley. And so that was my first kind of experience, kind of learning what it's like to kind of have a competitive job market and kind of compete and win. and get a job. I would say the 5 years that I spent at Morgan Stanley were very formative. It's a pretty brutal job. Interestingly enough, everyone talks about how you get paid a lot if you work in finance or you work on Wall Street. But if you actually calculate the number of hours you're working compared to how much you're getting paid, the hourly wages actually end up being very similar to working at McDonald's. So what I mean by
Oh,
that is might be making six figures, but just out of college, like 100K or whatever the amounts are, but you're expected to work like 80 to 100-hour work weeks. So if you think about it, like most people work a 9 to 5, so it's 40 hours a week. When you're working 80 to 100 hours a week,
wow.
suddenly if you were to compare like working at McDonald's where you're getting paid $20 an hour, or let's say you get paid like 50K a year working in some sort of role at a regular job, um, you're only working 40 hours a week. If you're working 80 to 100 hours a week but you're getting paid 100K on a per hourly basis, which one actually is more lucrative?
Right. And I actually used
So
to work. My fault, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt you.
no. But I bring this up mostly to illustrate that when I was first starting out, even though I was getting paid, six figures, I was actually working 80 to 100 hours a week, because that was what's kind of culturally expected at the company. And so it was a tough job, but I would say for certain types of people that are, viewing jobs not as sort of paychecks to take home, but investment opportunities to invest in personal growth and personal development. There's no substitute to working for like a top company or a top organization where you learn in the early days, and everything that you do and all the blood, sweat, and tears that you put in the early days actually will pay huge dividends down the line from a career perspective. So your original question was, how was my experience at Morgan Stanley, and like how did it translate to later career opportunities? I would say very brutal, very high stress. Um, when you make mistakes, some of these mistakes are hundreds of thousands of dollars cost to the firm. But it kind of foundationally set me up for the kind of work ethic and the mentality that made me a good candidate for future companies and future job offers.